So Cyrus, you get a little bit of my love. Not all of it though, we have boundaries and we keep them, we hold them, and you respect them. Okay, great. Oh, my leg itches so much! Ugh. Neighbors are watching me. Hi, I'm Ian, and around here I talk about books because I love to yap. But I'll be honest, I'm tired of yapping about my 2024 books. So this is my last 2024 related video, and this video is my 2024 bookish superlatives. This is basically an excuse for me to be able to talk about books outside of my top 10 and then also like double down on some of the books that are in my top 10 that I've already talked about. Probably too much. Like, to the point where I'm a little annoyed. So without further ado, let's get into it. Up first is The Goodest Dog. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about pets. And my favorite dog showed up in The Bandit Queens by Parini Shroff. So this is about a widow who's been ostracized by her community because they all believe that she killed her husband and got away with it. The twist is a woman in town wants to kill her abusive husband, so she goes to Gita, the main character, and says, well, you killed your husband and got away with it, will you help me kill mine? And then what ensues is a comedy of errors, a comedy of manners. Like, this is actually fairly dark humor and quite funny, but my favorite part is a ratty little street dog that starts to follow Gita around, and Gita sort of unwittingly adopts this dog, and she cares for this dog in her gruff sort of way, her slightly detached manner, and the dog in return protects her, especially against really shitty men. It seems to have like a sixth sense. And for those of you who have been on the internet for a while, y'all probably remember the blog Hyperbole and a Half on the illustrations that the author used to do. The picture of the dog that I have in my head for this dog is the same as the author of Hyperbole and a Half. I think Ali Bosch maybe is her name, but it's like an Ali Bosch drawing in my head. Wonderful. My most honest romance is the second superlative, and that was found in Taproot by Keezy Young. So this is a graphic novel. It is full panel, color pit, like stop. Gorgeous. Stop. But look, there's a color story here beyond just a regular story. But here's the story. Blue is having a hard time moving on. He's in love with his best friend. He's also dead. Luckily, Hamal can see ghosts, leaving Blue free to haunt him to his heart's content. But something eerie is happening in town, leaving the local afterlife unsettled. And when Blue realizes Hamal's strange ability may be putting him in danger, Blue has to find a way to protect him, even if it means leaving him. And I actually loved in this how transparent Hamal, the gardener, is, especially with Blue, about his emotions and setting boundaries and what he needs and requires. And even though I'm making it sound like it's this big point in the story, it really wasn't. It was just how this character behaved. And even though it was fleeting, it was also direct and honest and transparent. And who doesn't love that? Also, this story is a really beautiful and adorable and kind of dark way of exploring self-worth. The most pretentious book I read in 2024 goes to Blackouts by Justin Torres. I actually really liked this. This is 4 stars, but this is pretentious. This is about a young man who visits his former lover at this guy's deathbed. And at his deathbed, the two of them have philosophical conversations. They have conversations about sex and love, and they tell each other stories. And at the center of the room is this heavily redacted tome about human sexuality. This book has notations. There's so many nude pictures in here. I was so scared I just opened it up to a nude picture. Like, I can't edit that out. Notes in here. There are illustrations in here. And this is freaking printed in brown ink. It does not get more pretentious than that. I can barely suggest this to anyone. I read a few unput-downable books this year, but I was like, what is the most unput-downable that I read this year? And that was easily Drowning by TJ Newman. I actually listened to the audiobook, could not stop. It was so fast-paced. I listened to this in literally one day. So this is about a plane that crashes in the ocean, and eventually the plane sinks to the bottom of the ocean. And with it, there are 12 people trapped inside. From beginning to end, this moves at a rip-roaring pace, and it's so cinematic. Like a disaster movie, except the characters aren't annoying. And there is enough variety in the narrative among space and time and location, etc., that it doesn't feel stagnant whatsoever. This is great. Obviously, I'm going to be superficial and focus purely on aesthetics with most beautiful cover, but I was not expecting this to be the one, and that's Bluff. Poems by Danez Smith. This is their latest collection. I think it's their 3rd collection. They also did Homie and Don't Call Us Dead. This collection in particular is really powerful in this ever-increasing, like, polarized world that we live in. And of the author, this is both a sort of declaration of independence from systems of oppression and an apology meant for, like, themselves, forever believing that politicians could solve our problems. But I love the colors on this cover. the purple, the yellow, and I love collage art in general. And a lot of the imagery on here is imagery plucked from the poems themselves. So once you get to reading this actually all starts to make a lot more sense anyway, but this is beautiful. It's beautiful. I don't read a lot of lighthearted stuff. I am just not drawn to it, and it doesn't entertain me nearly as much. You know how Storygraph will identify like certain moods to books, and one of those moods is funny. And I looked, and I'd only read like 7 funny books this year, and I looked at them and thought there were maybe 2 that actually made me laugh, that I actually thought were funny. I had no idea that they were supposed to be funny. Like, news to me, whatever. But there was one book that actually did make me laugh that was supposed to be funny, and it worked, and that was Didn't Nobody Give a Shit What Happened to Carlotta by James Hannaham. I have raved about this book because it's super duper interesting and unlike anything that I've read before, honestly. So this book takes place over the course of one day. It's written in the vernacular, there are no quotation marks, and there is a stream of consciousness effect to it. This features Carlotta, a woman that transitioned during prison after being wrongly convicted of participating in a fatal armed robbery. And she's finally granted parole. So the one day that we follow her is her first day out of prison. She's acclimating to New York, she's meeting family as a woman for the first time, and she's also meeting her son, who she hasn't seen since he was little. But there's literally nothing funnier in here than Carlotta, her insults, her internal dialogue as she's trying to size people up, as she's trying to fully understand, like, what has New York turned into? Like, what whiteness is this? And not only is it funny, but her observations about the injustices of society just in day-to-day are acute. And we get a lot of time in her psyche to fully understand how she's processing all of this new information. And it's very, very funny. Then I decided to go kind of gendery on this, but I wanted to name my favorite mask character of 2024, and that was Cyrus Shams in Martyr. This was my second favorite book of the year, and I have been raving about this for a very long time. And I love Cyrus Shams. I want to protect him, and he deserves to be loved. But I want to make this clear, I have no desire to be his lover, because he still pees the bed and has so much unresolved trauma. Not to mention he's a writer and a poet, so you know he's a little crazy. But you can't blame him when his mother died after the US shot down a passenger plane that she was on. That's based on a true story. And then his father passing away right after he graduates high school and goes to college. That's a lot of trauma. But the dude is so smart, and he's so funny, and so talented, and creative, and deserving of so much love. And he seems next level unaware of all of it. So Cyrus, you get a little bit of my love. Not all of it though. We have boundaries and we keep them, we hold them, and you respect them. The most memorable femme character is essentially the total opposite, and that's from Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. I want to be honest, this was a really hard choice to make. I could think of 11 or 12 different femme characters to plug in here. I've already talked about a few of them. This weird ass neurospicy doll is my fucking favorite. This is a book about a woman who gets a job at a convenience store, and guess what? She fucking loves it. She also tries to date under pressure from her family to do so, and she doesn't really understand the point of any of it. And her family even thinks that she should be doing more, moving up the ladder or getting a better job, and she doesn't understand why. She loves what she's doing. And if all of that doesn't speak to my personal experience with having to mask my neurodivergence around other neurotypical people, I don't know what does. Yeah, I don't want to work at a convenience store, but I also want to do whatever the hell I want to do, regardless of anyone else's expectation. And that's why I freaking love this character, because she literally has no understanding of why you would do anything other than what you want to do, than what brings you joy. Can we please do that for ourselves, all of us. Then the award for spiciest sex scene goes to Cleanness by Garth Greenwell, because there is a literal 30-page sex scene in here. And I'll be damned if it doesn't actually capture the kinkier side of things with aplomb. In this sex scene, the main character has a hookup with a stranger. But I can't really say anymore because I will get kicked off this platform. So I guess you'll just have to pick it up for yourself if you dare. Moving on to most tears shed. And I had to really think about this. There weren't a lot of books where I cried. There were a few, but there was one book in particular where the tears were in greater number than other ones, and that was again Martyr. I also cried during reading What My Bones Know, obviously, and also reading In Memoriam by Alice Winn. Cyrus's struggles with addiction recovery and his being stuck in this cycle of grief over his parents and childhood just made it so that when the end comes, and if you've read this, you know the end, and it just becomes this bottomless well of tears. That's what it was. The award for scariest book that I read goes to Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell. And this was no contest. There was not a single book that I read in 2024 that scared me more than this. This is about a newly engaged couple who decides to go to their family cabin in the Rockies as sort of a celebratory getaway. But they discover that the soon-to-be wife, who we know suffers from sleep-talking, sleepwalking, and night terrors, has begun to respond to voices that her fiance can hear outside of the cabin while she's sleeping. And the rest of this book is one short 5-page chapter after another. So it's already propulsive, full of mysterious voices, strange shadows, unidentifiable sounds, inexplicable stains and objects. I'm being honest with you when I tell you that I was damp after reading this from sweating so much. I finished this in like a 3-hour stretch, late at night. I will say the last time that I read something remotely this scary was back in 2017 when I read Stephen King's It. Okay, so I'm neurodivergent, so obviously I'm going to be talking about the sensory experience of reading, which is very important to me, by the way. So the award for best sensory experience goes to Organ Meats by K. Ming Chong. I cannot suggest this book to many people, but before I even get there, honestly, this book makes no sense, so I'm gonna read the back. Best friends Anita and Rainey find refuge by an old sycamore tree with its neighboring lot of stray dogs who have a mysterious ability to communicate with humans. The girls learn that they have been preceded by generations of dog-headed women and women-headed dogs whose bloodlines bind them together. To preserve their kinship forever, Anita convinces Rainey to become a dog with her, tying a collar of red string around each of their necks. But when the two girls are separated, Anita sinks into a dream world that only Rainey knows how to rescue her from. As Anita's physical form begins to rot, it is up to Rainey to rebuild Anita's body and keep her friend from being lost forever. Filled with ghosts and bodily entrails and visceral lore, this is a story about the horror and beauty of intimacy, written in K. Ming Chong's signature poetic voice. And it is like poetry. It is insane. Here's the thing. This has amazing flop. I'm into this flop. This is a decent, good amount of flop. I love... You hear that? Textured cover. I really like that. I also love the colors. The pink and the red are really, really bold. This is already having a good kind of touch sensory experience to it. But then there's the mouthfeel of the book, and I don't mean me putting the book in my mouth, naughty, naughty boy. I'm talking about literally the words, reading the words out loud, which is what I did with a lot of this book. I would just read it, walk around my apartment, and just read it out loud because it felt so good to say. And there's something to be said for that exact experience. I highly suggest you check this out for its rhythmic lyricism. It is truly a unique experience in that way. However, don't go into this expecting to understand any, all, or some of it. Then the award for the biggest impact a book had on me this year is pretty obvious. You've all heard me talk about this book endlessly, and that's What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu. I read this over the course of a year. This had to be a slow experience for me because this is about complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Specifically how Stephanie Fu, who used to be an NPR correspondent, began her healing journey after receiving a sort of unofficial diagnosis of CPTSD. CPTSD is not in the DSM-5, which is the manual for diagnostics for medical professionals. You can't officially be diagnosed. However, there are experts out there that can help assess if CPTSD might be the better descriptor for what's going on with you, just FYI. But let me tell you, this is how my life changed after reading this book. I quit smoking after 20 years. I have not smoked since. It's been well over a year now. I lost 30 pounds. I've become so much more resilient to stress and depression and anxiety. I've done really intense, scary trauma work with a therapist. I hold boundaries better than I ever have before. And of course, all of those things resulted in a huge boost in confidence, which is pretty nice given how shitty the world is. The award for most adorable friendship in a book goes to The Mostly True Story of Tanner and Louise. And here's the thing. So this is by Colleen Oakley. This is about a down and out college dropout who is tasked with taking care of an older woman who is a bit of a spitfire and is nothing that you'd expect her to be. There's an intergenerational friendship at the center of the story. However, that's not the friendship that I'm talking about. And I can't tell you too much about the friendship because it is a literal twist, what I would describe as the most adorable twist that I have ever read, that speaks to the endurance of friendship through old age, through thick and thin. It is amazing. It's exactly how I want and expect my friendships to be when I'm in my elder years. For those of you interested in a lighter-hearted read, this is definitely a good one. There's a bit of mystery here. There's that intergenerational friendship. There's also stuff about the mob in here. It's kind of all over the place, and all in all, it is also a road trip story. So if those sound interesting to you and you're looking for some lighter fare, this is very sweet. I've talked about a lot of memoirs on this channel because I really like memoirs. I clearly have just talked about What My Bones Know. Stay True by Hua Shu was on my top 10 of this year, but I would have to say that my favorite memoir that I read is something that I have talked about a bit, but want to re-emphasize, Sociopath by Patrick Gagne. So this is written by a diagnosed sociopath who is also a therapist, and this is far more mundane than you would think it would be. I think that when we read memoirs, we expect sort of salacious details, and sometimes we even expect a trauma bond. But this book doesn't put the reader in a place of awe at how much they've suffered. In fact, this puts the reader inside the mind of a sociopath, which is totally different from anyone else writing memoirs right now. The goal of the author is to normalize personality disorders like sociopathy, to emphasize that just because sociopaths or psychopaths or anyone with a personality disorder lacks empathy or sympathy doesn't mean that they can't develop it, and doesn't mean that they aren't deserving of it. Also, the author is fairly well connected to Hollywood through a family member of theirs, and it was interesting trying to pick apart like who she was talking about. I was not successful, but I really want to know. The most disappointing book that I read this year was Goddess of Filth by V. Castro. I have complained about this a lot lately because this just feels like a gossip column. This was supposed to be a teenage possession story, that's what I thought, and it sort of was, with a feminist bent. I'm thinking Goddess of Filth, like this is gonna be grimy, strong, female characters, etc. That was not the vibe that I got, and frankly this was very hard to understand. This was not edited. There were paragraphs in which each sentence was making a different point or talking about a different thing. You cannot do that in a paragraph. The paragraph has to be related. I don't understand what's so hard about that. Everyone that I know that read this hated it. However, there seem to be people out there who love it. So I don't know, maybe that's you. Then the award for most forgettable book is Something Will Happen, You'll See. Nothing will happen. You saw. I don't remember any of this. This is a Greek novel translated from the Greek by Karen Emmerich. I read this for an Around the World challenge that I'm not doing anymore because there are not enough queer stories coming out of foreign countries that are being translated. This is a collection of short stories that take place in the late 2000s, early 2010s in Greece during the Grexit era when things were really bad. There were a few enlightening moments in here, but ultimately I don't feel like I understood that situation any better than before, and I genuinely do not remember most of it. So literally most forgettable. I remember maybe 1% of what happened in here. Last but not least, biggest surprise of 2024. I was not expecting to like Beartown by Frederick Bachman so much because it is a sports book. Also, although I loved A Man Called Ova, I really hated Anxious People, so I was really worried like, oh, a sports book by the guy that wrote Anxious People, I'm screwed. But you can call me crazy because this is the second sports book that I read in 2024 after reading Carrie Soto is Back that I loved. So this is set in a small town, Beartown, where a struggling hockey team is about to go to national semifinals, and if they take the whole thing, that could mean amazing things for Beartown. More funding, people moving to the place, tourism, etc. However, there is an incident halfway through the book that involves one of the star players on the hockey team that absolutely shatters the community and tears it apart. And once you get to that point, it's impossible to turn back. You don't want to put the book down, and I finished it so quickly once I got halfway through. I was so pleasantly surprised to see that there was not a main character, but an important character that is gay, and they are nuanced and they're not stereotyped, and it was a genuine surprise, especially considering this is written by a straight man, right? Like, I'm fully aware that a straight male author does not have to include anyone besides straight people in their book, and I was so happy to see not only was there a gay character, but there was a really nuanced and very humane gay character. Not to mention the story in this is just damn good. This is the first book in the Beartown trilogy. I plan on reading Us Against Them, which I believe is the second book, probably around December next time, like when I finish this. And those are my bookish superlatives for 2024. I hope you got some suggestions. If there are any books that you would have put in any of these categories that I did not list, please tell me. I am always looking for suggestions. I am so glad to be done talking about 2024, but I will continue to yap about books in 2025. Books from all different genres and niches, from different types of authors featuring different types of main characters. As always, have a great day, and until next time, happy reading.